Thank you, David. So, of course, transparency on a voluntary basis like that is a good thing and has provided a lot of useful information, but sometimes it is not enough. Sometimes information has to be pried from the unwilling maw of the government itself. And in those cases, it is the Freedom of Information Act that is often the most effective tool. So to discuss that, I'd like to invite up Jesse Franzblau from Open the Government.
So thanks a lot, Julian. Yeah, so I will definitely talk a lot about the kind of deep prying that we're involved in using the Freedom of Information Act to try to get information, particularly related to surveillance programs, information that we didn't have before. Some really tremendous groups used FOIA to unlock that information. So a little bit about my organization. So Open the Government is a coalition of over 100 organizations, all public interest organizations, an inclusive, nonpartisan coalition that works to strengthen our democracy and empower the public by advancing policies that create more open, accountable, and responsive government. We do a lot of work within the coalition using the Freedom of Information Act. It's one of the most powerful tools that we have as public interest advocates to get information from government agencies. There's a lot of great organizations within the coalition and outside of our coalition that are using FOIA to get information about surveillance programs. And so earlier this year, we published a guide on best practices of how to use FOIA successfully to get information related to issues that we care a lot about. And several of those cases look at how FOIA is being used to get information about surveillance programs, both at the state and federal and national level. And so I'm going to talk about a few of those cases today, particularly some of the FOIA work that's being done to expose records that have helped inform the public about surveillance programs that raise First Amendment protected, that raise concern over surveillance First Amendment protected activity, and secret information sharing programs that raise concerns about Fourth Amendment circumvention. So the first case I'll look at is one that the organizations Color of Change and Center for Constitutional Rights have been involved in for several years, trying to get information about surveillance of protest movements, particularly monitoring of the Movement for Black Lives Matter organizing. And what they have uncovered through this work is information showing that there is quite extensive monitoring by Department of Homeland Security and the FBI of the Movement for Black Lives organizing, including internal emails, field reports that have been shared and circulated with law enforcement agencies across the country. They've also showed some information pointing to things that we don't know about what's taking place in terms of surveillance of protest organizing. Some of the documents that they've gotten refer to a document called the Race Paper, which raises obvious concerns about the FBI programs that are being maybe carried out in a racially biased manner. So this has been an important case. Another somewhat similar one is Sarah St. Vincent at Human Rights Watch has done a lot of FOIA work to get information about how Section 702 of the FISA, which was mentioned, Executive Order 1233, has been used. These laws that govern large-scale surveillance programs have been used in different ways that, again, raise Fourth Amendment constitutional concerns. And what some of those revelations have shown is that U.S. authorities regularly hide information, sources of evidence in criminal cases, which is a big concern. And the documents that Human Rights Watch has been able to get show that this is happening a lot more systematically than was really previously publicly known. So this is a really important case, FOIA work that's ongoing. Another more recent one, Freedom of the Press Foundation and the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia were able to obtain the Justice Department's secret rules for targeting journalists with secret FISA court orders. This has been a really important exposure, an important piece of information to get out into the public realm, as it confirms long suspicions that the government has used secret FISA court orders to conduct surveillance on journalists. And so that's an important revelation that there's still efforts to try to get more information about what this signifies in terms of still how often these FISA orders are being used to monitor journalists. But this is kind of, one of these tip of the iceberg types of pieces of information that's come out through FOIA that's been really important. Another case, Project on Government Oversight, was able to obtain emails showing Amazon's kind of pushing this face recognition technology on agencies. These ones particularly related to Amazon pitching the Department of Homeland Security to provide them with the recognition with a K, which has been talked about here earlier. The pretty controversial face recognition technology that's being used more and more by law enforcement and federal agencies. And this piece was important to understand what's happening kind of behind closed doors, and also it came at a time when several Amazon employees were anonymously objecting to Amazon pushing this type of technology, providing it to federal agencies, particularly at DHS, where there's a lot of privacy and civil liberties and civil rights concerns with the way that this technology is being used. The next case looks at how organizations are providing platforms to give tools for the public across the country to be able to use Freedom of Information Act at the federal level, but also at state, using the state information laws to get records about how local surveillance is happening. So Muckrock and the Electronic Frontier Foundation have provided some really tremendous platforms for people to see how invasive surveillance technology is being used at the local level. And providing these tools, it's kind of giving the public the ability to create the requests themselves and to dig into what's happening at their local communities. The last example that I'll talk about is one that Open the Government, my organization, was able to obtain some documents from using the DC open records laws. So this is an example of how state open records laws can be used in a functioning and a really effective way to get information about oftentimes what federal agencies are also involved in, where federal agencies might be less willing to release the information. So in this case, we filed information requests related to the security planning that was happening in the lead up to the 2017 presidential inauguration. And what we got were some documents back that showed that there was some monitoring of protest groups in the lead up to Inauguration Day, where there were pretty large-scale protests that were being planned. And the documents point to this, but they're very heavily redacted. The documents are almost entirely blacked out, with only kind of small snippets to what was happening in terms of the intelligence monitoring that was taking place beforehand. And even though the DC mayor has ordered the DC police to release more information about this case, to remove the redactions and search for more records based on an appeal that we filed, to date, the DC police have not responded with the information. They've indicated that the Federal Secret Service is asking them to withhold the information on their request. So this is an interesting case that is still unfolding, and we'll let you know how that one unfolds. So in the guide, we were able to come up with some recommendations based on all of these examples, based on these kind of best case examples of how FOIA work has successfully led to the disclosure of important information that's been really critical in advocacy campaigns and in raising public awareness. And so we come up with some kind of fundamental tips, some recommendations on what composes successful FOIA work. So doing the background research is one, where understanding what else is happening out there in the landscape, who else is filing similar requests, and what successes have they had, or what obstacles they've ran into, and how to craft your own requests accordingly. Also, so you're not duplicating efforts and bogging down FOIA offices. Describing the specific record, so getting in as much detail as you can to identify the specific documents you're looking for. Also using other means like mandatory declassification review if you are able to identify a specific enough document, using that as a pathway to get information, national security related information. Appealing the denial by an agency is often an avenue to get more information after they have initially withheld information in response to your original FOIA request. And then on FOIA collaboration, so we've seen that a lot of success happens when groups are working in unison. So when organizations are teaming up with journalists or technologists, grassroots organizations are teaming up with litigators. There's a lot of really great synergy that happens when organizations and journalists and advocates team up to file requests and follow those through to get the information that they want. So learning what other groups are doing and learning the landscape is an important element to collaborative work. Planning litigation strategies early, so before you file a request, talking with litigators to see what else has been litigated. So if you think it's going to be rejected, you're wasting your time and going forward with the case that you're not going to be able to litigate. And if you are, planning it accordingly to be able to kind of predict that fight. Coordinating early with journalists, of course, is a big one to get the story out, but also get ideas from journalists about what's newsworthy, and then vice versa, journalists that are filing requests, getting information from FOIA experts about what they should be targeting. Partnering up in that way can be a really effective way to increase access to information broadly. Promoting FOIA reforms, you see again and again different FOIA redactions that come up that are blocking access to information. So promoting legislative changes that can actually fix this, which is often a long-term strategy, but a pretty critical one. And using state and local open records laws. We've seen that across the board, state laws vary quite a bit, but some laws are in different states are pretty effective in getting information that federal agency might not be releasing to you. Looking at archives overseas, so we've seen some cases where groups have been partnering with organizations in other countries, such as Mexico, using their information law to get documents about U.S. foreign policy in that country and what's happening with U.S. Government relations, which again is often a way to get information that the U.S. Government might not be willing to release, but through using laws overseas might have some success. We've seen some of those cases. So there are a lot of FOIA resources that we have, a lot of groups in our coalition and outside. There are just a few listed up here, but we're also trying to continue to document successful FOIA work and what it entails. So if you have stories about the successes that you've had or the challenges that you've had in your FOIA work, let us know. And the FOIA guide is also available on the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, their FOIA wiki site, and we're working to update that with new stories. So let me know what's worked, what's been successful, and where you've had luck in getting information through your FOIA work. Thanks.